Hi, my name is David Manock. My middle name is Isamu, Isamu, which is a Japanese name because I was born in Japan. My mom was Japanese, and my father was a Scandinavian, so I'm Eurasian, and I was raised in Japan, and at the age of 9, I was adopted by a wonderful family, Christian family, a couple here in Salem, Oregon, where I grew up. And I graduated from South Salem High School, and later I met my wife, Brenda, and she was 17 when I met her. At that point, I had gone to University of Oregon as a gymnast on their gymnastic team, competing in Division I NCAA gymnastics, which was a thrilling experience for me. We have been married 43 years, and we have 2 kids. Jonathan, who's 35 in the Pasadena area, and my daughter, who's younger than he is, and she works at Intel up in Portland. And we love seeing our kids come, and we have a great time with them. And my son is thinking of maybe even moving up here, which would be exciting for us. That's a little bit of my personal background, but I do want to share my professional background, which is twofold. But before I launch into that, back in 2007, I decided to have an intentional midlife crisis. And since I'm a psychotherapist, midlife crisis are things I'm supposed to have some experience about. So I thought, I will buy a BMW motorcycle. So I ended up buying 3 BMW motorcycles, not at the same time, and proceeded to put 145,000 miles on it. So that was my midlife crisis. And my wife was amazing. She didn't complain any of the time, and she didn't complain about new BMW motorcycles upgraded in model and in year. Swinging to my professional background, I have 2 backgrounds, one in theology and one in psychology. My intellectual growth began when I was a sophomore at University of Oregon, and I started to get interested in psychology. So I started to, on my own, read psychological books and take psychological classes. But the more psychology I studied, the more I realized the answers I was looking for weren't to be found in psychology. So I shifted to philosophy. And philosophy was instrumental in helping me to think clearly and argue and logic and so forth. But again, in philosophy, I didn't find the answers I was looking for, so I shifted to theology. And so when I graduated from undergrad, I went to McCormick Theological Seminary as a Presbyterian person. That's a Presbyterian seminary in Chicago. And then I started my theological education there. And I graduated in 1975 from San Francisco Theological Seminary, which is another Presbyterian seminary. And I applied for doctoral work, and a missions committee said, you have the grades, we think you can do doctoral work, but we'd like you to get field experience, go out in the field and be a pastor for a couple years and come back and do advanced degree work in theology. And it was just providential. I stayed out in pastoral ministry. My aim was more towards maybe teaching philosophical theology rather than being a pastor. But I took a little small country church, Brownsville United Presbyterian Church, which dated back to 1847, the 3rd oldest congregation in the state of Oregon. And it was a pioneer church, and it was really a great experience. Young seminarian, totally clueless, didn't know what I was doing. But I had been taught the science of the interpretation of the sacred text called hermeneutics, and more technically a subdivision of hermeneutics called exegesis, the art and the science of interpreting the sacred text. And so I began to be a young pastor, and Brenda and I got married, and for 9 years I was there, and that church was very, very formative as I learned to be with people, try to help people, and help them to grow in God's love. So that's theology is a passion of mine. I think all of us should wrestle with theological issues. Who is God? How do we interact? What does a movement towards God look like? What is that experience about? Deconstruct that. Try to be honest in terms of our religiosity. And how do we integrate these transcendent things in the human experience? And who's Jesus historically? And what do the Gospels reveal and show us? And then how do we care and love each other, taking God's forgiveness and so forth? So that's a lifelong journey of mine, and I'm still at it, trying to understand those things and practice those things. In 1996, in 91, I was called to be the senior pastor of Pasadena Presbyterian Church, which happened to be 70% Japanese Americans, and which was a good cultural fit for me. It was like walking back into my home culture. And as soon as I stepped on campus, like my Japanese radar from childhood kicked in. I had forgotten the language, but boy, did I pick up the relational nuances. It was a wonderful reunion experience for me to be back with Japanese people in that context. But my wife encouraged me to go to Fuller and do a Ph.D. because she knew I had wanted to do advanced degree work. And so my response to her was, how can I do that? I mean, I'm senior pastor of a large-sized church, actually a medium-sized church, a lot of work, and we had 2 small kids. And I will never forget, she said, listen, David, if you do the PhD work, I will exempt you from all housework. And I was shocked and didn't know if I could really take this in, because it seemed like an incredible gift. And I said, do you mean I don't have to do a thing? She says, no, until you finish your degree. And so she made it possible. So I decided, well, I have 3 choices. I could do a PhD in theology or try a PhD in psychology, because Fuller Theological Seminary had 3 schools back then: School of Mission, School of Psychology, and School of Theology. And I decided at my age then it would make sense to do a PhD in psychology, so I chose family studies, and then switched to PhD in marriage and family therapy. And so I was not only trained in systemic psychology, but I then had to be clinically trained to do marriage and family therapy. And so that led me, after graduation in 2006, George Fox University asked me to come and be an associate professor in their graduate school, and that was an incredible invitation and a blessing.